Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show. So I should start off the top by saying that I think I'm going to have to be even more careful of what I've said in the past. According to the BBC yesterday, YouTube has banned all conspiracy theory videos falsely linking coronavirus symptoms to 5G networks. And now I have never done that. Apparently, David Icke of Lizard People infamy did so. But I don't know. Let's see. Now, any content that disputes the existence or transmission of COVID-19 as described by the World Health Organization and local health authorities is in violation of YouTube policies. Now, I've never doubted the existence or transmission of COVID-19. However, I have had grave difficulties with the political and public health responses to it. So obviously, I will have to keep that in mind. So, I wasn't on the air yesterday, and that's because I was moving. It was a kind of a desperate situation there for a while because I couldn't find a place to live because that's hard to do in Victoria right now, obviously in lots of other places as well. And I was supposed to be out by the 6th, and that's not a date on which people move in or out of apartments. Typically, they move on the 1st or the 15th. So I had to put up all my stuff in boxes. That was fairly easy enough. Then I had to find someone to help me move them to a storage space. And the difficulty was all the storage space places were giving the impression that it would be very difficult to deal with a human there in order to make arrangements. But this very nice fellow from Victoria helped me move everything in his Honda CR-V. Took about 5 trips. Whenever one is moving, one always loses something. I lost my computer desk because it wouldn't fit in his vehicle. Well, I suppose I can get another. So I was out of the apartment, and I had everything in storage. It's just a ruinous cost. I don't have all that much stuff. As I mentioned a year and a half ago, or actually about a year ago, everything that I had would fit in a RAV4. But I rented this space, and it's 9 feet tall. But of course, I suppose one has to be rather good at stacking boxes to get them 9 feet tall, a wall of them 9 feet tall, so that they don't fall on one's head or crush all your other belongings. The boxes that I had were small boxes, liquor store boxes, wine boxes, the like. Difficulty being not all the same size. And I was very much running out of space near the end there. And even though only about 40% of the space had been used. So next up was getting a hotel. And most of the hotels in Victoria are closed. So I found out from one hotel, which was closed, some names of others that were open. I looked one up on the internet. It came up with the number, called it, inquired about prices. That was 2 days ago. Yesterday, went to book a room for a week. And made the reservation and walked into the lobby of the hotel. And the woman at the counter said, well, it's not through yet. Sometimes takes 10 to 15 minutes. Actually, I'd made the reservation from across the street. Of course, moving into the lobby of the hotel was fraught with its own difficulty because they were not allowing people to enter. The front door of this hotel is now permanently locked. Presumably that will fool the chuds, the living dead, who can't read, so they can't go around to the back of the building through the parking lot. But waiting half an hour, and it's still not come through. So what was the deal? Oh no, we don't offer a room at that weekly rate. And oh, you don't have a credit card. Actually, I do have a credit card, a prepaid credit card, but they don't like those. So it looked like it was going to fall through, which would have been very bad indeed. And so I talked to someone higher up in the chain on the phone, and he said, no, this is not the number that you call to book for this hotel chain. The number does go through to this company, but no, can't make bookings. So, okay, so what was the deal? I explained that, and I was told that what a crippling deposit would have to be given. And I asked, well, what's that? Well, it was $100, which doesn't seem all that crippling to me. So I got my booking finally. Actually, this is a suite. It's the biggest and finest hotel room that I've ever stayed in. The price was, I talked about how much I paid to stay in Edmonton in your standard little shoebox a year and a half ago. Well, let's say this room is 2.5 times as big, and the price was about 45% less than the standard hotel room. And this is Victoria in April, which is, I suppose, the beginning of tourist season. So I did pretty well in that regard. Obviously, I'm going to have to find a permanent place to live, because even with the deal that I got, staying in a hotel room is cripplingly expensive. I set up my computer, and I'm using my desktop and my big 32-inch monitor. I took the computer in a suitcase along with all of the peripherals, and I carried the monitor on my lap in the car. So the reason that this live stream is a little late today is because when I went to sign in, start my Google stream, Google said there was evidence of suspicious activity on my account. Yeah, I'm using my computer from a different place, which I guess is suspicious activity in their minds. So I had to come up with a password, a new one, using numbers and symbols. Well, I'm glad that Brave, the browser that I use, memorizes my passwords and sign-in codes because I couldn't remember all that stuff. I suppose I could write it down somewhere, but I would lose it. I suppose I could put it in a Word document or whatever. But I like it when my browser memorizes the things like that, so I don't have to. So the theme of today's show, well, hang on, let's go to the chat first. Let's see if there's any activity there. Jonathan Paul says, I fit everything I had in Kurdistan in 2 suitcases. Yeah, I mean, I've talked about this before. I don't have a lot in the way of belongings. I have a TV set, stereo equipment, and pretty much all of the rest is Blu-rays and DVDs. Everyone's streaming nowadays, but I like to own things. And now that, streaming quality has been cut, I think I've been vindicated. John S. says, much better audio all of a sudden, too. Very nice. Well, I cannot imagine why that would be the case. It's the same microphone, same computer. The only difference is this is being run over Wi-Fi instead of an Ethernet cable, and that would seem to indicate like less quality. I don't know. I was going to explain. Yeah, Oberon once said that a man without possessions is scarcely to be distinguished from an animal. It is, I suppose it's rather a judgment on my life that I have so little in the way of material possessions, and I'm almost 65 years old, but that's the way that it has turned out, and I don't want to lose what little I have. Josh Randall says, nice looking flat. As I explained at the top, this is actually a hotel suite. I didn't ask for suite, but that's what they gave me. Hang on. Let's see. Chad Chadson says, hey, Kevin. Well, hello to you, and thank you for your work. Okay. Port Hope. Jonathan Paul says, I know a guy that can get you a place in Port Hope for 600 Canadian a month. I don't know where Port Hope is, but it sounds very much like Ontario. Okay. Good. The audio is far clearer. Well, again, I cannot possibly explain that. Hope you got the chance to see Better Call Saul. I did, and I will be talking about it. Better acoustics. Yes, this is a, there's no carpet in this room. And yeah, if you're dealing with sound, you do not want a carpeted room, because a room of tiles, of flooring is much more alive. Do they include breakfast? No, there's no amenities. They're not even maid service. If I need more soap, shampoo, towels, whatever, I can go down to the front desk and they will give it to me. But they're not making the bed. But that's not really a problem. It's king size bed. I haven't slept in a bed for at least a year and a half. Could have fixed audio by hooking in, unhooking USB cable, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Let's get to the news. And what is the news? Well, there's only one story right now. Actually, there's one story in three variations. Story number one, we're all going to die. Story number two, maybe we're not all going to die. Story number three, how are celebrities dealing with the lockdown? Let's explore their pain. This is 2 days old, but I think still relevant, from ABC News. One of the nation's top public health officials Monday suggested that because Americans are taking social distancing recommendations to heart, the death toll from the coronavirus will be much, much, much lower than models have projected. If we just social distance, we will see this virus and this outbreak basically decline. And I think that's what you're seeing, said Robert Redfield, the director of the Centers for Disease Control, who has been rather sidelined through this crisis by Dr. Anthony Fauci. He continued, I think you're going to see the numbers are, in fact, going to be much less than that would have been predicted by the models. Well, I've probably said this before, but I will say it again, that we have no idea whether this social distancing, whether this flattening the curve has worked or will work. We're not in any position to know because of the lack of testing, and perhaps more to the point, we don't know how many people were infected by coronavirus in March, February, January, or even December. We don't know. So we're in no position to say. But as I predicted, I believe 3 weeks ago now, yes, they are going to, the powers that be are going to shut down the world, destroy the economy, destroy society, and then congratulate themselves on a job well done. So Bill Gates is not an authority. I suppose he used to be a big authority in the computer world, but he's been throwing his weight around. He is worth many tens of billions of dollars, so I suppose that makes him an authority. Story from News Punch, where mainstream fears to tread. Left-wing billionaire Bill Gates, I don't know how left-wing Bill Gates is. He seems to be pretty much in the center, which admittedly is fairly left in historical terms. Bill Gates has warned that certain social gatherings may not come back at all until the public are widely vaccinated. Gates issued the warning during an appearance on CBS This Morning podcast. Which activities like schools can be done in a way that the risk of transmission is very low? And which activities like mass gatherings may be, in a certain sense, more optional? Unless you're widely vaccinated, those might not come back at all. Well, there's no vaccine. We don't know when there will be a vaccine. And of course, the difficulty with vaccines is that there are always reactions to them, sometimes minor, sometimes major. Mass use, tens of millions of use of vaccines is going to sicken a fair number of people, and it's going to kill a certain number of people. Let's see, Lionel Media responded to Bill Gates. Explain one thing to me. Who exactly elected Bill Gates as spokesperson for humanity? Who is the one who appointed or anointed this man as designing and scripting human interaction? I don't recall that vote. Do you? Well, yeah, but of course, Bill Gates is not the only one doing this. Bill Gates continued to say, it's most important to be looking forward and saying, are the number of tests growing? Is the speed which they come back less than 24 hours? And are we testing the right people? We're still not there. What does opening up look like? Gates asked. Which activities like schools? Well, I already repeated that part. This is backed by other research, including an Imperial College paper published in March warning that transmission will quickly rebound if stringent social distancing measures are relaxed before a vaccine is produced. Key bono, who benefits? Well, Bill Gates got left behind at the beginning of the internet, and then he came roaring back. The computer people don't like the social world. They don't like the meat space world. They want everything to be done virtually. And of course, the experts want ever more control over our lives, and they have achieved that to the point where we are afraid to go outside, if we are allowed to go outside, and in many places we are not allowed to go outside. And now we believe that every single other person on Earth is a direct and possibly fatal threat to us. I believe this is known as divide and conquer. From Fox 5 New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo reported another record day of deaths in New York as the coronavirus claimed 779 more lives. In a bit of good news, Cuomo said the curve is flattening in regard to the number of new cases. He says that hospitalizations are down and some hospitals are releasing more patients than they take in. The governor says the healthcare system could stabilize over the next few weeks, but he cautioned that everyone still needs to be doing social separation and staying at home for work. Again, pat yourself on the back. Destroying the economy, destroying society. Governor Cuomo. But here we go. Here's the theme again. When will things go back to the way they were? I don't think it's about going back. I don't think it's ever going back. The question is about going forward. Going forward, isn't that the same phrase that Bill Gates used? And that's what we have to deal with here. I don't think we return to yesterday where we were. I think if we're smart, we achieve a new normal. And that is a most frightening phrase. At least to me, from the Washington Times. Oh, here's our old friend, Dr. Anthony Fauci. And he's holding his glasses up to his face, and he's sucking on the end of the stem in a very professorial look. Dr. Fauci, America's most listened to medical professional on the coronavirus. This is from Cheryl Chumley. And apparently on all the political, economic, cultural, and social precautions every man, woman, and child in the nation should take on the coronavirus, has just warned what cooler heads coronavirus watchers have suspected all along, that this country may never go back to normal. Here we go. Never, that is, Fauci suggested, until a vaccine is developed. And by logical extension, that's to say never until a vaccine is developed that must then be included on the required list of shots for all children to attend school. What great news for Big Pharma. What great news for Bill Gates, who just announced his foundation is going to spend billions of dollars to help build factories for 7 possible coronavirus vaccine makers. Spend is probably the wrong word here. Invest is more like it. After all, Gates, first and foremost, is a businessman, a billionaire businessman who made his billions in Microsoft and who just left his billion-dollar Microsoft enterprise to pursue other matters, specifically to serve humanity, is how the Economic Times puts it in a March headline. For a taste of how he's already served humanity, one need only look to the disastrous Common Core, one-size-fits-all, top-down education plan that his foundation bankrolled. From education to vaccinations, the service to humanity never ends. But this is just what Fauci warned at a White House briefing with reporters. When we get back to normal, we will go back to the point where we can function as a society, but if you want to get back to pre-coronavirus, that might not ever happen in the sense that the threat is there. Last time I checked, deaths in the United States from coronavirus are about half that of the Hong Kong flu of a few years ago, notwithstanding the fact that the CDC has ordered that all people who die with coronavirus are to be labeled as people who died of coronavirus, which is absolutely absurd. America's most influential coronavirus model just revised its estimates downwards, the Washington Post reported. Well, okay. I guess it must be the flattening of the curve. It must be the social distancing. And since this virus was always going to be around, or other viruses are always going to be around, we can't have society anymore. That is clearly the message that we're getting from the elite. Story from the Wall Street Journal. When will you feel safe around 20,000 fans? Again, the NBA is exploring the concept of hosting the playoffs in a fan-free bubble. If they get clearance from public health officials, well, the English Premier League is contemplating a shift for the last quarter of its season to the middle of summer. But there are many skeptics in the NBA, including LeBron James, and the most ruthless soccer league on earth acknowledges that matches will be on hold until the conditions are safe and appropriate. Even if they manage to finish this season, they could find themselves in the same position next season. They could also find themselves running into ferocious competition for eyeballs with the NFL and college football if those seasons begin on time. California Governor Gavin Newsom said on Saturday that he doesn't believe his state's 3 NFL teams will be playing in front of fans come September. September? No, wait a minute. Okay, we're in April, May, June, July, August, September. That's 5 months from now. One would think that we'd see a little optimism from these people with the number of cases going down, with the number of deaths going down. But apparently any risk is too much of a risk. Now, the sports leagues have suffered falling attendance for some years. Now, this has been particularly noticeable in the NFL, where there's a legion of people out there on Twitter who delight in showing quarter-empty, half-empty stadiums, even in places, even like for the Washington Redskins, which was notoriously the hardest ticket to get pretty much in professional sport. Can professional sports recover from this? I know that there's a fair number of people out there who talk about sports ball. I mean, I've engaged in it myself and think that it is out of control and takes too much time, attention, and money from people, that it's the opiate of the people, replacing religion. But again, I don't recall any kind of vote to abolish professional sport. Considering the alacrity with which the sports league said long before anyone else started panicking, okay, we're not doing it. Baseball season is not going to begin at the end of March. NBA, okay, we're canceling the season. We're shutting down. I don't know. They played their part in terms of going along with the most extreme views of this. But according to the governor of California, no NFL season in September. Well, if not then, when? The price of oil has been absolutely hammered, such that oil sands oil, the kind that comes from north of Alberta, Fort McMurray, has been selling for less than $5 a barrel. That's not premier Alberta oil, by the way. Oil sands oil is not used for fuel. It's used for making plastics and such like. It's kind of garbage oil. But even so, the province of Alberta is, what are they talking about? 25, 30% unemployment there. And Jason Kenney, my old friend, he seems to have given way to panic about this, absolute panic. As of this morning, the number of cases in Alberta was 1,373. The number of deaths, 26. This is in a province of 4.4 million people. 26 deaths. That is not very serious, it seems to me. Alberta was already in grave trouble because of the previous collapse of oil and because of the failure of the Keystone extension to go forward and the decision by Canada's elite not to have any pipelines running to the west or to the east. Well, one of them has been approved. Let's see whether it happens. In any event, from MSN, this is from Bloomberg, actually. For more than 3 decades, U.S. presidents proclaimed cheap fuel as an almost God-given right for American motorists and homeowners, shaping the country's foreign policy in pursuit of lower prices. As President Donald Trump didn't just back cheap crude, he was its biggest supporter, frequently attacking OPEC and celebrating the shale boom's deliverance of energy dominance. Now, the Russia-Saudi price war and a killer pandemic have caused prices to plunge, putting Trump in the awkward position of begging those same countries to turn off the taps, even though retail gasoline will become more expensive as well. The U-turn comes as America has gone from being the top importer of oil to the top producer, aligning its interests more closely with Saudi Arabia and Russia in a shift that holds the potential to reverberate through foreign policy for years to come. It used to be very clear for decades when the U.S. was the largest importer, low oil prices were a real benefit to the country, said Dan Yergin, Pulitzer Prize-winning oil historian and vice chairman of IHS Markit. But now it's very different. It's become such an important industry again with the supply chains that go all across the country. Well, shale oil is a chimera. It loses money hand over fist. The amount of money, and it gets depleted. You have a 50% decrease in output over 18 months. The amount of energy inputs which are required to bring this oil up to the ground is absolutely shocking. It requires an enormous debt, and this debt it threatens to cripple the banks that have provided the money. The problem with oil as it stands now is that if the price is too low, well, the oil companies aren't going to produce. There's no point in them doing it. If it goes too high, then the economy begins to shut down. And of course, there's less reason to have oil. Kunstler says that the tipping point is about $75 a barrel. But if we look at the new sources of oil around the world, given that so many of them are offshore and not near offshore either, far offshore, these require multi-billion-dollar investments even before any machinery is put up there on the seas or any holes have been dug. They're going to need much higher than $75 a barrel for that new oil to make sense economically. So what's happening in the markets? Well, the Dow was up again, a fairly big jump for the Dow. I'm looking at CNBC, and they have this annoying habit that pretty much as soon as the New York markets close, they stop reporting the numbers and go on to the futures. But I think it was up 700 points or something, the Dow. And the futures are for tomorrow are up $125. Now, in retrospect, it seems to me this could be an enormous political issue that the United States absolutely hammered. People, millions, tens of millions of people put out of work. Thousands, tens of thousands of businesses shut down, maybe hundreds of thousands, and many of them are not coming back. So what's the important thing? The most important thing is to make whole the market. Wall Street must be made whole. Wall Street must not suffer. Trump escalates tension with World Health Organization over coronavirus pandemic, repeats threat to withhold funding. So we're going to do a study, an investigation, and we're going to make a determination as to what we're doing. In the meantime, we're holding back, Trump said. It was not immediately clear from the president's comment if he was holding back on the funding or probe of the WHO. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the administration is reevaluating the WHO's funding, adding that the UN's health organization hasn't achieved what it intended to do, particularly in response to the coronavirus pandemic. It hasn't? How do we know that the WHO has not achieved precisely what it intended to do, which seems to me was to run interference for the People's Republic of China and the Communist Party of China, which runs that country? I'll have more on this shortly. Angelo Codevilla, very wise man, certainly one of the most intelligent people that I've ever met. He has a piece in American Greatness called "Is the President Forgetting Politics 101?" Americans elected Donald Trump, his negatives notwithstanding, because they disliked what the ruling class had been doing to the country, because they distrusted its pretensive wisdom, because he promised to rule by a sense that defies that of the ruling class, but that he has in common with the people in large. I'll just break in to say, people say that Donald Trump is an elitist. Well, they're wrong. They couldn't be more wrong. He has defined himself outside the elite for, well, the entirety of his adult life. And I don't know how people could not recognize that. Codevilla continues, that is why the ruling class's nonstop campaign to show in every imaginable way that Trump is outside all of its norms only strengthened the people's preference for him over them. As the mutual disdain that divides the American people and the ruling class continues to grow, and as Trump stands unmistakably as the former's protector against the latter, the fundamental law of politics, who is on whose side, guarantees his election by a bigger margin. Unless, of course, Trump himself sides or is perceived to be siding with the rulers against the ruled. In that case, his fate is even surer to be that of the proverbial salt that has lost its savor, thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden underfoot of men. Since the Ides of March, President Trump has placed himself on a path that the fundamentals suggest leads to political suicide. He did this by surrendering to the ruling class, Doctors Anthony Fauci, Deborah Birx et al., not to mention House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. His judgment on whether and for how long the country should be shut down. This is of the greatest concern to the American people in general and to his voters in particular. By giving his imprimatur, while suggesting that he is acting against his own better judgment, he fulfills the dictionary definition of tragedy. Let's see, it's April 8th. I'm looking forward to Trump announcing the United States to be open again on May the 1st. I don't know. I think that maybe Trump lost confidence in himself, because I think that his initial evaluation of the coronavirus was absolutely correct. But then he allowed himself to be bullied, essentially by the medical establishment and by the media. Codevilla writes, Trump is an intelligent, practical man, conscious of his peculiar responsibility as the one and only person elected to be responsible for the whole country. He knows how wrong Fauci was in the professional judgments he had given in January and February, minimizing the coronavirus's effects, for which he is not being held responsible, even as Trump was damned as a racist for closing down air traffic from China on January 31st. Every day, Trump and the country learns the ostensibly professional estimates by which Fauci, the Democrats, and the media have been flogging since mid-March are growing wrong by huge factors. And Trump knows that they are wrong because they are based on numbers that do not reflect reality. Like all those who pay attention, Trump knows that the number of confirmed cases means nothing because most infections do not result in cases, and hence that the real number for infections is surely higher, possibly by an order of magnitude. Also, the counting of deaths from COVID-19 is being revised downward because many of these deaths result from other causes and are attributed to COVID-19 only because the person happens also to have tested positive. The smaller numerator and the enormously larger denominator means that the real lethality rate is a fraction of 1%. That is why the curves Fauci, the medical establishment, the media, and the Democratic governors cite for keeping the country shut down mean nothing. Trump also knows that this establishment is hurting Americans by restricting the use of hydroxychloroquine, while physicians on the front line and millions of people who feel endangered are benefiting from it or yearning from it. Trump is eager to open the country, and he knows that the American people will hold him, not Fauci or anyone else, responsible for the pain that adherence to the ruling class's estimates is causing and will cause us. Speculating why, nevertheless, Trump persists in lending legitimacy to these flawed professionals, indeed why he lets them speak in his name, is pointless. But Trump's daily confusion of himself with Fauci et al., no less real for being half-hearted, presses the question of how we may stop our pain and prevent the next bailout bill and the ones after, so presses on Donald Trump. Going back to the question of qui bono, well, if you believe in big government, and by big government, I mean like Bernie Sanders, Jeremy Corbyn, AOC big, this coronavirus panic, hysteria has been an absolute boon. One thing is certain. The ruling class savors the grip on us that is achieved during the past 3 weeks, above all the presumption that we must quietly accept non-legal decrees from on high. It will not give up that grip without a fight. Regardless of when Trump acts to reopen the country, they will do whatever is in their power to prevent him from exiting the path to political perdition which he has entered. They won't give him a pass out of it no matter what. Nothing that happens in April or in May, June, or whenever, nothing that any curve does, will induce any of the ruling class to say, okay, let's all wash our hands, take precautions to protect the old and the obese, and get back to normal. Fauci has warned that perhaps this virus will return with every flu season. This is more than enough for such as New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who has already said that the country will never be allowed back to normal and is echoed in that by the media to greet any suggestions to move toward normalcy with the charge that it makes one responsible for deaths. Blood is on your hands will be their rallying cry. That in turn means anyone who may wish to lead America out of the quandary into which it has slipped because of our health officials' incompetence and of President Trump's apparent neglect of politics 101, who is on whose side, will have to return to its fundamentals. To wit, start from the fact that the ruling class is discredited, separate yourself from it, lose no opportunity to add to the discredit, stress your own responsibility, act on it. When they damn you, double damn them. Politics 101. If you've been following Trump's daily press conferences and the coverage of it, Trump is doing essentially everything that the hysteria boys and girls, well, it's mostly girls, want us to do in terms of destroying the economy and wrecking society. And they're still not giving Trump credit. I'll call this, I came up with this formulation, 30 years ago? Something like that. Let's call it Mulrooney's Law. That Brian Mulroney, who was elected prime minister in 1984, he had this reputation for being a right-winger, an extreme right-winger. He was nothing of the sort. He was a corporate businessman with the attitudes that one expects of corporate businessman. He was a labor lawyer, for God's sake. And Brian Mulroney was constantly trying to suck up to the elite, which he was a part of, and to suck up to the media, and he got nowhere at all. So my formulation of what I call Mulroney's Law is, if you're going to do the time, you may as well do the crime. In other words, there's hardly anything or even nothing that you could do that would make them hate you more than they do already. Now, Codavia had an earlier piece in American Greatness, on April 2nd, in which which is called Doctors, Doctored Numbers, and Democracy. With the peak, let's see, hang on just a sec here. These numbers, these millions of infections, hundreds of thousands of deaths, were ones that health officials had been spreading through a sensation-hungry media for some time. Together with a poll question that framed the choice just so, they had already helped produce another set of numbers. Quote, voters overwhelmingly preferred to keep containment measures in place over sending people back to work prematurely. Trouble is, though, that these numbers come from just some doctors. They reflect neither reality nor broad medical opinion. They are synthetic products that hide the often ignorant assumptions that they reflect, substitute for reason, foster panic, and ruin the country. The following shows how soft and hence divorced from reality these numbers are, what it would take to produce hard numbers, i.e. ones reflective of reality, and the manner consistent with self-government in which such matters should be debated and decided. All admit that the numbers that are scaring the sense out of the country are mathematical projections. All projections are based on assumptions about the ever-changing numbers of, quote, confirmed cases of COVID-19, as well as of deaths resulting therefrom. But few, and here it seems we must include many health officials, consider that the latter numbers are themselves soft and tell us next to nothing but how much, how little, or what kind of dangers the virus poses to us. Certainly, they give no guidance about what restrictions any of us should apply to ourselves, never mind what the government should do to the country. To make intelligent decisions about countermeasures, we would need to have hard data about all of these matters. Yet for 2 months, doctors such as Anthony Fauci have messed up millions of lives and commandeered trillions of dollars while scaring the hell out of people and watching curves based on projections, based on meaningless numbers. Watching the several curves resulting from the testing that is now ongoing and that is projected to continue as the country suffers will provide only more guesses that will feed more models and more disputes. The most important fact about COVID-19, its true mortality rate, is the number who die of the virus divided by the number infected by it. No algorithms, simple arithmetic. In short, Fauci et al. Are showing themselves to be typical of our bureaucracy, over-credentialed, entrusted with too much power, and dangerously incompetent. We don't know how many asymptomatic people there are. Hence, meaningful epidemiological testing must include a random representative sample of the population, regardless of whether they are presumed to be infected or not. The numbers resulting from monitoring what happens to the health of individuals in this sample over a few weeks would tell exactly what percentage of people in each category and subcategory suffer, what consequences from whatever contact with the virus they happen to have. As it happens, a sizable chunk of such data is about to come into existence. The virus is rampant among the 5,000 or so personnel aboard the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt. Everyone aboard is being tested. By the time that is done and the ship sits off Guam and returns to the United States, we will have a good idea about the rate of infection and some factual notion of what happens to those infected, at least among the sailors' demographic group. Now, he points out, Codavia, that it's quite possible that the flattening the curve is going to mean that the epidemic is going to last longer. Eventually, everyone will be exposed to COVID-19, coronavirus. Now, it seems to me it's quite possible that close to everyone has already been exposed to it. Again, if the proper social distancing measure is not 6 feet or 2 meters, is in fact 24 to 27 feet, and the virus can live on metal surfaces for up to, 9 days, then it's a pretty clear bet that we're almost all exposed to the virus. Rush Limbaugh has been banging the drum on this subject. Yesterday, he said, every time I've stopped to think about what we're doing to ourselves, I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. Folks, I don't want to sound corny here. I'm really not trying to sound corny, but if you knew how much, and I've mentioned it over the course of the years, if you knew how much I appreciated you. He says, I know these experts, and they may be experts, and they may be brilliant, and they may know doctors and nurses and health backwards and forwards, but they don't have a connection with any of you. And not like I do, and I'm scared to death for you. Look at the hospital industry right now. Look at the doctors and nurses who are being paid half. They're frontline soldiers going to work every day. The president talked about it yesterday. They're frontline soldiers. And even though 98% of the people who get it recover from it, 98% of the people who get it recover from it, according to Bill Bennett in his piece yesterday. Limbaugh's argument is that country has to be started again. We cannot support this country on donations. We can't support it on gifts. We can't support it by confiscating the wealth of other people. We've never been able to do that. This economy has to sustain itself. This economy has to be roaring and producing its own GDP. Do you know the size of this economy before this happened? $22 trillion, sum total of all economic activity. The richest man in America has $78 billion, not even close to $1 trillion. So yeah, it might make people feel good to have, Bill Gates send $5 or $10 billion to the New York hospital system. But once you do that, they're going to come to expect it. You can't print enough. We're not going to print 22 trillion. And well, yes. And we seem to have come back to the magic beans theory of economic growth here. That the government just prints money and and this is going to bring out some sort of economic utopia because there's a step missing in there. A healthy economy is based on people working and producing useful goods. The government needs this in order to have any kind of semblance of a real economy. Of course, the governments can print as much money as they like. In the United States, with petrodollars, in a better position to do that than any other country on earth. But inflation is the result. And don't believe the official government numbers on inflation because they leave out certain things. Oh, like the cost of medical care and the cost of post-secondary education. The numbers on inflation have been jury-rigged to make sure that they don't bring down the growth of GDP. If inflation was measured at its true rate, we would find that GDP for quite a few years has not been rising at all. So let's get back to the chat here. Claire Caw says 175 COVID-19 deaths in Quebec, 174 in Ontario, 48 in BC, 29 in Alberta. Could Kevin like to explain the differences? I can't. I can't for the reason that it's possible that BC has a different protocol with regard to ascribing causes of death. BC has, in the Vancouver region, Greater Vancouver, an extraordinarily high Chinese population, and people from China and Wuhan in particular were, bringing this virus to Canada. One might expect that this would result in a great many more deaths. Of course, Toronto has a very large Chinese population as well. I don't know, considering how the bad faith with which this all began, the bad faith from the World Health Organization to begin with, I don't know that we're ever going to get to the bottom of what happened here. Because it is not in the nature of elites to admit that they have made mistakes. I mean, they don't do it. They just don't. Because, then let's replace you with someone who seems to know what he is doing. Lecomte de Brea says Mario Bartiromo is making fun of Fauci now. Well, how about that? I'm glad to see that. Yes, the original Money Honey. A very good-looking woman, but she's always seemed like an intelligent woman to me. A spiritual mamster says, we don't know the real infection rate time to test. Well, yes. Yes. Obviously, there's a great demand for tests, but if the government wants to be in the position to make decisions, the best decisions overall, and of course I'm counting the economy in this, because the economy is, where our livelihoods come from, then a significant number of these tests should be just of the random population and of, random demographics. Ben S. says, all the corporations are in a race to show how much they can protect their customers. I've seen people out in the streets, and this social distancing, unless you're going to lock people in their homes or, weld them into their apartments as they did in Wuhan, the social distancing is impossible to maintain. I go to Save on Foods, and they put stickers, red stickers on the floor. Wait here, wait here, wait here, wait here. Well, people are moving through the aisles. They're moving both vertically and horizontally, and they come much closer than 6 feet or 2 meters. They will come, within 1 foot or 6 inches to another person. It's unavoidable. And I really haven't seen anybody panicking about this. I suppose, if you go to the grocery store, then you expect that to happen, but people haven't stopped going to the grocery store. I think that people are a lot less scared than the media would have us believe. VDR says, has KMG been typing red rum furiously into a typewriter? Does this look like the Overlook Hotel? Did I just see Kevin take a swig from a Coke bottle like Millennial Woes? Yes. I haven't figured out how to make tea here yet, so I need my caffeine. So Coca-Cola, which is a wonderful drink. Okay, so what else do we have? Victoria has a Chinatown. It's not much. It's really not very much. There are far fewer Chinese people in Victoria than in Vancouver. I'd say the Chinese population is like 1/6 proportionately. That's a guess. KMG should drink a Corona, not a Coca-Cola. Well, I believe that manufacture of Corona beer has been suspended. I think I reported that yesterday. Apparently not essential. Well, is alcohol essential? Well, governments around the world seem to have determined that it is, and I'll get to that later. I think that they shut it down because it's too embarrassing. Laramie Hirsch says females have completely bought into it, this cult of hand washing. Yes, this is a female-led panic, and we see that most of the health officers in my country and elsewhere are women. You can't mix whiskey with Corona, says Chad Chadson. That just sounds absolutely disgusting. That may be possibly the most disgusting drink that I've heard of, and I know what a Manhattan is. My foster mother had a Manhattan occasionally. For those who don't know, it is sweet vermouth and rye or Canadian whiskey. It is absolutely revolting. The cult of Canadian whiskey, it's too sweet. It's like candy. Laramie Hirsch says they love the shutdown and they will always prefer the net of authoritarianism. Well, it's just such a big gamble that we're going to destroy the economy and we will benefit thereby. That is really a stab in the dark there. When you destroy a country's economy, you are looking at a potential revolutionary situation. Okay. You're all going to get COVID-19 exposure. I worked for a woman in the school board, Richmond School Board, British Columbia, some decades ago. Computer virus. Now, this was not an unintelligent woman, but somehow she got it into her head, and I'm not making this up, that it was possible for viruses, I mean actual, not virtual viruses, to be transmitted over the computer. KMG took it on the chin, says Brandon Smith. I cut myself shaving a couple of days ago. I was in a big hurry to shave before the show. I was running late. Perhaps I could shave earlier in the day, But I was careless with my razor and made a rather deep gash. Okay, so let's get back to it. The Z-Man. What must be done? The Financial Times, the strange-colored newspaper you see at airports, is not known for its skepticism of modern global economics. Therefore, it was a bit of a shock to see the mouthpiece of global finance come out in favor of a radical rethinking of the economic order. They argued that all options must be on the table in order to address the tattered relationship between the people and their governments. In other words, the social contract must be restored after the virus panic ends. The alleged sentiments behind the editorial are not wrong. The primary duty of any government is the welfare of the people, is why we have government. Sure, we assign it functions like protecting private property and enforcing contracts, but that's not the reason we invented government. Similarly, the state defends the privileges of the rich at the expense of everyone else. This has been true since the dawn of man, but again, this is not why human societies have governments. The point of government is the general welfare of the people. That means defending against attacks from abroad and attacks from within. The former is straightforward, but the latter is where things get complicated. Defending against internal threats is about a set of laws and customs for the purpose of maintaining order. The character and nature of the people will determine these internal structures. Good order in the hands of the Mohammedan is different than good order in the Orient. This is not a concern in a world of nations and nation states. In a world of global capital and the free flow of goods and people across borders, it is nearly impossible. The state cannot enforce the customs of its people when its people change with each generation, maybe with each decade. When economics requires the people to yield their ancient customs and liberties, the point of government is no longer the welfare of the people, but as a middleman, facilitating conformity to economics. The social contract, if there is one, is not built around a set of economic policies. It is not a set of rules imposed by the keepers of the economy in order to make transactions as efficient as possible. The social contract is the invisible bonds between the people. It is this dedication to the shared welfare that necessitates the creation of the state in order to maintain those bonds. And he goes on to say that the social contract can exist only among a people with a shared ancestry. If the goal is to restore the social contract, the first step is not a new round of economic fads, but a restoration of ancient bonds among people. The West must first become a collection of nations again. Only in a world of nations can the governments of those nations preserve and defend the social contract. Safeguarding the welfare of the people can happen only when there is a people rather than just people. Homo economicus is in direct contradiction with the concept of a social contract. Socrates could not flee Athens and avoid death because to do so would mean he was no longer Socrates. Who he was as a person was defined by his membership in the polis called Athens. The social contract cannot exist in a world of atomized individuals. The social contract can exist only in a world where people are defined by their membership in a society of their people. And yes, he concludes by saying the revolution in thinking will not come voluntarily. This fact is made plain in the Financial Times editorial. The reason the great defenders of cosmopolitan globalism suddenly sound like Marxist undergrads is they want to preserve the current order at all costs. If it means embracing nutty ideas like universal income, that's fine. Just as long as the class of international pirates can ride the oceans of global capital, if that's what it takes to keep Homo economicus going, so be it. It just occurs to me that the multicultural state, of course, is one reason for the sanitary dictatorship, for the coronavirus panic. In a real nation state, it would be far harder for this sort of panic to get started and to seize the imagination, the souls of everyone. Multiculturalism makes people without chests, as men without chests, as C.S. Lewis said, that there is no sense of unity any longer, or there is no sense of unity from the ground up. It all comes from the top down now. So that if Dr. Anthony Fauci says this must be done, well, then I suppose it must be done. Okay, so I mentioned the WHO again, and Trump's threat to withhold funding. They were wrong about a lot of things. We want to look into the WHO because they really called it wrong. They missed the call. They could have called it months earlier. They would have known. They should have known, and they probably did know. The president noted that the WHO actually criticized his travel ban from China that he set in late January. Just January 31st, that's more than 2 months ago. So Trump really was ahead of the curve on this. Not that he gets any credit for it. Such restrictions can have the effect of increasing fear and stigma with little public health benefit, WHO Director General Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said about the travel bans just days after Trump banned travel from China. Trump said of the WHO, they seem to be very China-centric. That's a nice way of saying it, but they seem to be China-centric, and they always seem to err, always on the side of China. Yes, and it would appear that is by design. From the Daily Mail. The man running the World Health Organization, trashed by Trump as China-centric, is a career politician who worked for a communist junta and became the WHO's first non-doctor director general following intense lobbying from Beijing. A little-known figure before the coronavirus pandemic. Well, yeah, that's a good thing. It's a very bad situation when bureaucrats become well-known. Dr. Tedros, who has never practiced as a medical doctor, is a career politician who was born in what is now Eritrea, began work under the communist Derg junta, came to study in the UK, then rose to the top of Ethiopia's government, first as health minister and then foreign minister before being elected to lead the WHO in 2017. He is now facing heavy criticism over his handling of the pandemic, especially for praise he heaped on China's Communist Party for its response, hailing the regime's commitment to transparency and saying the speed with which it detected the virus was beyond words. This is not the first time that Dr. Tedros has been accused of cozying up to China. Shortly after his election victory in 2017, it was alleged that Chinese diplomats had been heavily involved in lobbying for him. UN records also show that Chinese contributions to both Ethiopia's aid budget and the WHO have substantially increased during times when he was in the top leadership positions. Shortly after his election to the WHO, a report in the Times said, that would be the London Times, said Chinese diplomats had campaigned hard for the Ethiopian, using Beijing's financial clout and opaque aid budget to build support for him among developing countries. Dr. Tedros, who is married and has 5 children, was born in 1965 in Asmara. As a child, he saw his younger brother die to an infection, which he believes was measles, which he later said spurred his determination to work on health and health policy. He graduated from university in Ethiopia in 1986 with a degree in biology and went to work as a health official in the regime of Marxist dictator Mengistu Haile Mariam. According to the BBC, Dr. Tedros then joined the hard-left TPLF, which started life as a communist party and played a major role in overthrowing Mariam in 1991. It later became part of the EPRDF, a coalition of left-wing parties that ruled Ethiopia until last year. His PhD is in the field of community health. It's funny, in recent years, or the last decade, this fellow has a PhD. This woman has a PhD. PhD in what? And then there's a string of words, and I'm thinking, this is not an academic discipline. And increasingly, PhDs are given out in fields which are not academic disciplines. Let's see. Jill Biden has been at her husband's side during news conferences, I suppose because she is, well, if there's two people there, it's good to have one of them who is not senile. Jill Biden, who calls herself doctor and insists that everyone else call her doctor. She got her BA, then she got an MA from Villanova, then she got a master's in economics from Westchester University, and then at the University of Delaware, she got her doctorate in education. And again, it's not an academic discipline, what she got it in. And I remember some time ago, I was looking at her thesis, and it was, it's in educational leadership. Why don't they just say, okay, you can call yourself doctor, we're going to give you a doctor, and it's in the field of blah, blah, blah. Educational leadership is not an academic subject. World Health Organization experts warns against ending strict lockdowns in Europe and says it is dangerous to think the marathon crisis is slowing. Dr. Hans Kluge, the WHO director for Europe, said the crisis was very concerning. In a clear warning this morning, he said, now is not the time to relax measures. Well, I suppose there still exists an economy. So, until the economy is truly destroyed and we've been reduced to what? Subsistence? Digging roots up out of the ground and eating those? Then the health expert's job will not be done. Let's see. Dr. Tedros said that politicizing the coronavirus issue should be avoided by countries, quote, if you don't want to have many more body bags, unquote. Senator Josh Hawley responded, oh, really, Dr. Tedros? Body bags? You're a disgrace. The U.S. shouldn't give a cent more to the WHO until you and all other Chinese Communist Party collaborators are removed. Alternately, the United States and other countries could pull out of the WHO, set up their own organization, which would be the real organization. Fact check. This is from the National Pulse. Fact checked. Trump asked a reporter if she was working for China. She is. Now, this reporter, hang on. Well, it's going to make me scroll down a long way to find out the actual name of this reporter, but don't worry, I will get to it. No, the reporter said that her company, Phoenix Media, is privately owned. She's lying. The Hong Kong Cayman Islands-based Phoenix Media is actually owned in large part by the Chinese Communist Party and by a former CCP propaganda officer. As of 2018, Phoenix Satellite Holdings was owned by Liu Changli, 37.1% of shares. He is described as a former PLA propaganda official who is close to senior Chinese government leaders. Chang Li previously worked as a propaganda officer for Chinese National Radio, then known as the Central People's Broadcasting Station. A further 20% of the company is owned by Extra Step Investments Limited, in turn owned by China Mobile Hong Kong, which itself is owned by the Chinese government-owned China Mobile. 8% more of the company is owned by China West Investment, owned by the Bank of China. This means that at least 65% of the company is owned by the government of China. For journalist Yu Wang, I told you I'd get to the name, to claim she works for a private company is an outright lie. The White House Correspondents Association must surely answer to why they are allowing a CCP propagandist a seat in the White House press briefing room. Yes, and Conservative Treehouse, the last refuge, explains how this happened. ABC's Jonathan Karl invites Chinese Communist Party to attend White House coronavirus briefing. Remember when President Trump said the U.S. media was the enemy of the American people? Well, consider this. In another clear example of how the U.S. media will do anything in their effort to undermine President Trump, yesterday they held hands with the Chinese communists. ABC News Chief, a Washington, D.C. narrative engineer Jonathan Karl, is the current rotating head of the White House Correspondents Association, which has a customary and traditional role of selecting the journalists who will participate in the White House daily briefing. He invited, Jonathan Karl that is, a known propagandist for the Chinese Communist Party into the briefing room to question President Trump. However, Trump immediately pegged the CCP propagandist and asked her directly, "Are you working for China?" That said, the bigger question should be asked of Jonathan Karl. Why did you do this? Perhaps more disturbing and clearly exhibiting his political alignment with the effort, Dr. Fauci signals his approval for Jonathan Karl's efforts as he exited the briefing. There's a lot of controversy about this. That job well done, he said this or signaled this, or perhaps he was just saying, see you tomorrow. Well, I wouldn't be surprised, not in the slightest, actually. Oh, yes, Senator Bernie Sanders has dropped out of the race. You know, the Democratic race, the one that everyone stopped caring about some weeks ago. I'll remind people that Joe Biden finished 5th in the New Hampshire primary. 5th. That is the kind of result that typically leads to a candidate leaving the race. He had done quite poorly in the Iowa caucuses as well. But I guess the Democratic establishment decided in 2020, as they did in 2016, that they could not allow Bernie Sanders to be the nominee. And so it's got to be Joe. Got to be Joe Biden. If you've seen any of his hilarious statements on the coronavirus, he said, what? We fought this in 16, and then we fought it in 17. And what on earth are you talking about, man? This is from Breitbart. Former Vice President Joe Biden became the presumptive Democratic nominee on Wednesday after his top rival, Senator Bernie Sanders, opted to suspend his campaign. Why do they use that word suspend? It suggests that it might come back at some point. This is, let's see, the 77-year-old former vice president was also hamstrung by frequent gaffes and lapses on the campaign trail. A number of those verbal missteps, including one in which Biden appeared to forget a key quote from the Declaration of Independence, only fueled speculation about the state of his cognitive health. He's a candidate that is mentally deteriorating. People in the Democratic establishment say, oh, don't say that. They really believe that they can shield Joe Biden from public scrutiny, and the reality is they can't. Justin Horwitz, Democratic strategist and Sanders supporter, admitted during an appearance on Tucker Carlson tonight. Well, I suppose this is good news. The coronavirus is good news for Biden. I mean, his response to it has been, well, perfunctory, pathetic, but no one's paying any attention to him. As Anthony Codavia pointed out, this is all about Trump. That Trump is going to be judged, and his presidency will depend on whether the people decide that he has made a hash of this or not. If Trump is seen to have handled this effectively, he's going to win easily. However, if he is judged to have needlessly wrecked the economy, well, then he is in serious trouble. And politics is mostly about how bad the other guy is, not how good you are. Politicians don't like to hear that because they like to think that they have won because of their outstanding qualities. Well, it hardly ever turns out that way. Joe Biden, I suppose in normal times, well, I mean, come on. The Democratic Party would be looking for any excuse to take him off the ticket because they fear the Republicans getting a supermajority in the Senate and the Republicans taking back the House. They fear that Biden was going to drag down the Democratic Party to oblivion. So let's have some more patting on the back for the people who have wrecked the world. UK's lockdown is working, the Daily Mail reports. Symptom tracking app says 500,000 fewer Britons have telltale coronavirus symptoms this week as ministers say, it's still too early to lift the strict measures. Well, spring just started in England. What, it was 20 degrees late last week, or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which is outstanding weather for London at the beginning of April. Flu season tends to be, wet and cold, winter and spring months. The fact that there are fewer people with coronavirus symptoms, you mean like high temperature and hacking cough, et cetera, well, those are symptoms of other conditions, just like normal influenza, even the common cold. A team of researchers at King's College London who developed the COVID symptom tracker app say the number of people reporting symptoms has dropped. Latest analysis from this app, which has been used by more than 2 million people, estimates there are now around 1.4 million with symptomatic coronavirus in the UK. This is a drop from a projected 1.9 million on April the 1st, and the scientists called it really encouraging. You see that they're not measuring people who have coronavirus. Again, they are extrapolating from other data. And we just put up with this. Okay, so here's the actual symptoms. Do you have a persistent cough, coughing a lot for more than an hour, or 3 or more coughing episodes in 24 hours? Are you experiencing unusual fatigue? Are you experiencing unusual shortness of breath? Do you have a loss of smell, taste? Do you have an unusually hoarse voice? Yeah. These are symptoms, as I say, which apply to many, many other illnesses. Are you experiencing unusual fatigue? How can that be quantified? What counts as unusual fatigue? If people are scared, if they believe that they might be suffering from a disease, which they have been told will kill everyone who gets it, I suspect if they're feeling fatigue and they're worried that they might be infected with the coronavirus, they're going to believe that their fatigue is unusual, or that the combination of, the panic with their mild symptoms might actually lead to unusual fatigue. And in the DDoI category, obesity is a major risk factor for those with coronavirus, says France's chief epidemiologist. And after this whole panic is over, and God willing, sooner rather than later, I don't ever want to hear the word epidemiologist for a long, long time. This study backs other studies that say obese patients are at greater risk of severe complications and remain contagious nearly twice as long. Obesity, that's about the worst thing that you can have. And it is correlated to a host of other medical conditions. I thought everybody knew this. France's chief epidemiologist, Professor Jean-François Delfraissy, says that being obese is a major risk factor of those infected with coronavirus. He is particularly concerned about this in the US, where 42.4% of the population is obese. Studies have shown that chronic health conditions such as obesity, diabetes, and high blood pressure can increase the risk of infection and death. Of course, diabetes and high blood pressure or hypertension are very highly correlated to, wait for it, obesity. Obese people who become infected with the flu are not only at greater risk of severe complications, but remain contagious longer. In the US, there are more than 422,000 confirmed cases of the virus and more than 14,000 deaths. And I will point out that that is still considerably short of the Hong Kong flu of several years ago. Now, this disease has been racialized, and it's been racialized because non-whites in the United States, well, I'll have to be specific here. African Americans and Hispanic Americans, their rate of obesity is much higher than that of white people. The rate of diabetes, particularly for Black people, hypertension, off the charts compared to white people. These are pre-existing conditions, But notwithstanding this, there seems to be a belief coalescing that coronavirus is a deliberate or semi-deliberate attempt by the U.S. government to kill Black people. It sounds crazy, but figures that I've seen show that something like 40% of American Blacks believe that AIDS was developed in, I believe, Fort Meade, Maryland, in order to bring about a genocide of Black people. And there's also their belief about Church's Fried Chicken and various drinks, soft drinks, which supposedly were manufactured to make Black men sterile. If that was the case, then the government has clearly failed. I'm looking at the picture here of the mayor of Chicago. Her name is Lori Lightfoot. And she is standing at a lectern, but just her face and her expression is almost always like this. She looks like a murderer in the dock. She looks like an unrepentant murderer in the dock. This is one of the most frightening faces I've ever seen. But the good people of Chicago decided in their infinite wisdom to elect this pugnacious Black lesbian as their mayor. From Breitbart, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot took guff Monday for getting a haircut only a week after scolding the Windy City for not shutting down non-essential businesses, including barbers and beauty salons. The celebrated first openly gay mayor was pressed by the Chicago media over the haircut she got over the weekend. But Lightfoot insisted that since she is the face of the city, she deserves to be excused from the governor's orders to shut down non-essential businesses as a measure to prevent the transmission of the coronavirus. The vain mayor told the media, "I'm the public face of the city. I'm on national media, and I'm out in the public eye. I'm a person who I take my personal hygiene very seriously. As I said, I felt like I needed to have a haircut. I'm not able to do that myself, so I got a haircut." You want to talk more about that? Looking at her hair, I don't know. I think it would have been fairly easy for her to chop a bit off. See, apparently this virus and the panic, it's all about her, the public face of the city. I take my personal hygiene very seriously. I don't really think that removing a month's growth of hair is a hygiene issue. In fact, I'm certain of it. That has absolutely nothing to do with hygiene, unless, of course, your hair was dragging along on the ground. And the only person whose hair I ever saw that was even close to that was the country singer Crystal Gale. She came into my radio station once, and there's only two people. You know, there's a lot of famous people come into radio stations. There's only two people in the years I worked for talk radio that everyone in the station had to see this person. And the first woman was the woman who Pierre Trudeau knocked up when he was in his 70s, Deborah something or other. They had to see this woman. Who is the woman who entranced Canada's most famous divorced man, Pierre Trudeau, and in his 70s? And the second was Crystal Gale. Is her hair really that long? Yes, her hair, at least then, was really that long. So before we move on to Canada and the view from the island, let's see what we got here from the chat. Chad Chadson says, I went to my mom's for tacos and a haircut. Andrew B says, barbershops will come back. Yeah, I don't know about that. You know, with men, if their hair is really short, particularly if they've lost a lot of it anyway, they're going to have to, start cutting their own hair. And I suppose if they have to do it 3, 4, 5 times, they get better at it. And I suspect that a lot of them will say, well, I don't want to go to the barber anymore because I don't need to go to the barber. I really think that I really think that that's the case. Ultra testosterone makes a genocidal statement about obese people. We hear a lot about education, particularly with regard to health. I suppose there are, public service announcements, PSAs, campaigns about obesity and how direly predictive it is of one's health and one's longevity. But they don't seem to have done any work at all. He also remarks COVID-19 is going to ravage Wignet slobs like Matthew Heimbach too. And he's done if he gets COVID. Well, yeah, I don't think the prognosis would be good. The Sean Murphy Journal bank stocks went up today, and I think that's the most important thing, isn't it? Banks must do well. They really must keep on doing well. Andrew B says, I don't understand why Kevin downplays the virus so much, because the panic is essentially based on a fraud. It's based on a black box from Imperial College London, which politicians and the media seized upon in order to induce panic in people and strip them of their most basic human rights, such as, the ability to leave the house or to sunbathe. Sunbathing has been banned in Britain, banning sunbathing. And, never let a crisis go to waste. Well, as I said last week, you don't need a crisis. You can simply posit that there is a crisis, and it turns out that that's good enough. That is good enough. I told you to trim those sideburns. Yes. That's a Simpsons joke. I don't have sideburns. Never had them. Bob Paxton says, I have wall clippers and mirror. If the back of my head offends you, too bad. As Bill, on King of the Hill said, it will always grow back. It's much easier for men than it is for women. One of the reasons being that women, as a rule, generally have so much hair, and a really bad haircut for women is much more noticeable. Much more noticeable, and they take it. They take it worse. I mean, I have seen women, come out of the hairdressers, and they got talked into a cut, which they see themselves reflected in a window. I've seen women burst into tears. I mean, it's sad, but they take it. They take it much worse than men do. So let's update the numbers here. And the numbers in Canada, which has a population of 38 million people, they're not high. Number of confirmed cases, 19,274, 435 deaths. 435 deaths in a country of 38 million people. And it's the end of the world, and everything must be shut down and the economy destroyed. And our Prime Minister, Princess Rockstar, seems to have persuaded himself that there can be a functioning government for months at a time when effectively 50% of the population will be on government benefits. You take the unemployment rate and you add the number of retired people, and we're looking at about 50%. In my province of British Columbia, 48 deaths, 1,336 people. 5.1 million people in British Columbia. Again, it's just absolutely shocking. Absolutely shocking. So let's talk a little bit more about our Prime Minister, Princess Rockstar, who is still hunkering in his princess bunker. He was given the go-ahead to reunite with the wife and the kitties. He has 3 of them. Got a lovely wife, Sophie. And what was this? This was, 12 days ago. So he's in day 26 of a self-isolation. He's in no hurry to get back to the wife and the kitties. And with every day that he does not return to the bosom of his family, there's going to be more people who are going to believe the rumor that his wife left him about 5 months ago. So what is Princess Rockstar's prognosis? The federal government doesn't know, this is from the CBC, when the COVID-19 caseload will peak in Canada, but Justin Trudeau says that the country's physical distancing efforts are making a difference. Pat yourself on the back there, Justin. We don't know exactly when we're going to be peaking, but we do know if we continue to do this, if we continue to keep the measures in place that we have right now, we will get through this much, much quicker. He said that Wednesday during his daily news conference outside the Princess Bunker. Trudeau said that while there are significant differences between provinces and territories, Quebec, for example, has close to 10,000 cases, while Nunavut has none. Nunavut is a frozen wasteland above the Arctic Circle that last time I checked had fewer than 25 miles of paved roads. Who wrote this story? Catherine Tunney is seriously comparing Quebec to Nunavut. Anyway, our Prime Minister continued. So we have a glimpse into what is effective and what is working to bend those curves in other countries that what we are doing now. Our social distancing over the past weeks and staying at home has been very effective. And regardless of the model in place, it is clear that the best outcomes come when there is maximal social distancing, as we're pretty close to doing right now, regardless of the model in place. What a fatuous man. So when's this going to end? When are we going to try to get back to normal? The Prime Minister said, once we are through this initial phase, we will then be in a mode until there is a vaccine, which could take many, many months, if not more than a year to get to. We will be calibrating very careful our behaviors as a country, as a society, as an economy, to managing the existence and persistence of COVID-19. Better testing, careful isolation of vulnerable communities, measures of gradually bringing back the economy will come. No, they won't. A year? More than a year? Many, many months? If this regime goes on for many, many months, there's going to be civil disorder in my country. There are going to be provinces who decide this is the time to get out. Justin Trudeau has never worked in a productive job. He has no idea of how the economy works. It's really manna from heaven as far as he's concerned. And his job is just to, gather up this manna from heaven and distribute it in the most equitable fashion. The manna from heaven will keep falling. It doesn't matter whether 50% of the population, of the working age population, is out of work. It doesn't matter whether many thousands of businesses go under. The manna from heaven will keep falling. So, what's happening? Oh, no, hang on. Yes, that's another story about Trudeau, and we've already talked enough about Princess Rockstar. Health officials announced 5 more dead of COVID-19 in BC, 45 more infected. The total number of casualties in the province is 48. So a total of 135 people in BC are hospitalized with COVID-19 and 61 are in critical care. Again, 5.1 million people in British Columbia, 135 hospitalized, 61 in critical care. That certainly sounds like the end of life as we know it, doesn't it? So our provincial health officer, Dr. Bonnie Hendry, says we need to stay home this weekend. This is not the time to take unnecessary travel. It's not the time to go to some of our smaller or more remote communities. Why this weekend? It's Holy Week. Holy Thursday tomorrow, Good Friday, Holy Saturday, and then Easter. Yes, which is the premier feast of the Christian church. And yeah, you don't want to take part in it because there'll be blood on your hands if you celebrate the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. She didn't make that explicit, but I think the message is clear. Quote, we need to make sure that we consider the impact that such a misstep could have on everything that we have done and everything that we have put together in the last couple of weeks. It's no time for us to let up at all. What have you done? What have you put together? Is there widespread testing? No. Is there any kind of useful data about how many people in British Columbia have been infected by the virus? No. No, there is not. What you have done is to issue orders which wreck the economy and wreck society. Most of BC's cases and hospitalizations continue to be located in the lower mainland. So, Island Health Region, that's where I live. About 800,000 people in Vancouver Island. There are 81 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 11 hospitalizations, 2 deaths. 2 deaths. And the whole of the island is locked down. This is insanity. There is no other way to describe it. So I was looking up, I was trying to find details of a man called Jeffrey Garner. And I found some. I found what I was looking for. Jeffrey Garner is fast becoming one of the most pioneering and recognized leaders in the mental health care profession. Within his extended career of over 20 years in the U.S. Army as a leader, he has embodied the mantra, failure is not an option. This has enabled him to push his clients out of their comfort zone and challenges the stigmas of mental health therapy, therefore perpetuating the strengths in each of his clients' new normal. Wow. There's no getting away from the new normal. Through his bottom line up front, BLUF technique, and consistent approach. Although the therapy model used at the Veterans Therapy Haven is not your typical sit and talk therapy, it is quickly garnering the long overdue recognition it deserves. He has incorporated an equine-assisted psychotherapy, equine-assisted learning, Veterans Administration PTSD recovery program with his gloves off, down in the dirt approach with some astonishing results. Master Sergeant Jeffrey Garner Sr. was born in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma in 1977 and graduated from Choctaw High School there in 1996. As of the time that this was written, Jeffrey is a single father to 15-year-old Tori Ann, 14-year-old Corey Beth, and 12-year-old Kepi, and lives in central Oklahoma. Well, what does this have to do with Canadian Corner? Well, this fellow is married to a Canadian MP now, Michelle Rempel Garner, as she now styles herself. So this would be the second marriage for both of them. I read that Mr. Garner, a former Staff Sergeant Garner, has gotten to repeated difficulties bringing his emotional support animal onto various kinds of transportation. So there was an extraordinary tweet storm from Michelle Rempel Garner, who is a conservative MP from Calgary. And she has been accused many times of drunk tweeting, of drunk tweet storms. And they're typically along the lines of, am I good enough? Well, yes, I am good enough. And darn it, people love me. Get a lot of that. Okay. So this tweet storm is sent to the governor of Oklahoma. That's what I knew about her new husband. So I thought, why is she tweeting to the governor of Oklahoma? I found the connection. Hi, Governor Stitt. I'm an elected official from Canada. Kind is the equivalent of the American congressional rep. However, I have a big problem that only you can solve. It is close to my heart and is causing me no end of anxiety, and is related to COVID-19. You see, I got married to one of your electors about a year ago. He voted for you, and he proudly served your country for over 24 years in the Army. I have 3 stepkids by him, and I'm worried because of the lack of state clarity on isolation measures related to COVID-19. Like you, my days are spent fielding countless calls on how to protect our community from the spread of COVID. Like you, I come from an oil-producing flyover region that is routinely overlooked by the elites in the populous power bases in coastal regions of our nations. But back to COVID. There's overwhelming evidence that if we stay at home, we can flatten the curve in the short term. Here's my problem. I'm a new stepmom, and I don't believe that my stepkids really understand the threat of COVID. I need your help. I'm trying to keep one of them at home, and she's been more obedient than most. She even took a leave from her job at my request because there were no state guidelines for PPE in the industry that she's in. I'm not sure she'll have a job to go back to. But because of the lack of statewide rules on staying at home, she can dismiss our rules. This isn't Canada, Michelle. She's 19 and she loves hanging out with friends. She thinks that being at someone's house means she's not at risk. Even my husband has said that because there aren't statewide stay-at-home rules, forcing her to stay at home is hard. This struck me so deeply that I'm breaching protocol and reaching out to you directly. Trust me, I know the path is not easy. Every closed-down measure we take affects the livelihoods of the workers of our community, but I'm speaking to you as a mom. I'm begging you to come up with a state framework to address stay-at-home measures to save lives. I need to be able to point to my family to your leadership and advice when telling them to stay at home. I can't do that right now because your rules aren't clear. It's frustrating because as a legislator myself, I keenly understand how deadly and how profound this virus is. Please, for the next few weeks and for the sake of our families and their safety, ask the kids and people of your state to stay at home. Tell them the truth, that their in-person time with friends can wait and that every gathering has profound risks. Get them to give you the time you need to ramp up testing and other resources to contain the spread of this virus. Please shut things down. I'm looking to you, even though I'm not a citizen, to say that it's not okay to gather and to implement the measures other jurisdictions have taken before it's too late, because we're all in this together. Other countries share the same land, long border trade, friends, and families. If there's anything I can do to help, let me know. But please, please take more action to get the people of your state to stay at home and quickly as you can. My best, and everything above said, not out of criticism, but out of deep concern for those I deeply love, whom you have authority to govern over, Michelle. Okay, now this gets confusing. Because, okay, so she married an American ex-serviceman from Oklahoma. But correct me if I'm wrong, people, doesn't this tweet storm give the impression that her husband and her stepchildren are residents of Oklahoma? Does it not? Wouldn't he have moved himself and the stepkids to Calgary to be with his wife? In what sense is Michelle Rempel a mom? Because it seems that they're not her children, they're stepchildren, and she is not in any kind of close physical proximity to her. In fact, they seem to be about 1,500 miles away. But this is the kind of entertainment that we Canadians get regularly from Michelle Rempel, now styled Michelle Rempel Garner, that I'm going to tell the governor of Oklahoma what to do because some people that I'm tangentially related to, 1,500 miles away, could be at risk. Yes, the price of matriarchy is eternal panic. Okay, we're running out of time here. Oh, yes, Paul Wells. Can the forces of globalization ever hope to outlast the coronavirus? Openness and trust were fraying before COVID-19. The damage done to this worldview is certain to last. I'm not so sure about that, actually. Because, again, with patting on the back, it's global unity. Everyone panicked except the Swedes, and they're always neutral. Everyone panicked, and the panic saved the day. The experts were given full reign and the experts triumphed. So we need more leadership, not by elected men and women, but by experts. We need an expert dictatorship. I guess this is typically Canadian story from the Hill Times. MPs join fight to stamp out COVID-19 disinformation that's spreading faster than the virus. Disinformation or misinformation now means non-elite views. That's all it means. The World Health Organization, that esteemed institution, has warned of an infodemic of misinformation and disinformation around COVID-19. And as authorities, companies, and individuals work to combat it, 2 members of parliament have joined an international initiative aimed at calling out and fact-checking online content around the virus. How about they start with fact-checking this? How about they start with fact-checking the Imperial College model? How about they start fact-checking with how many people are infected? We have no idea. None whatsoever. But all these agencies and governments are making decisions based on data, which is completely unreliable. Again, numerator, we got that, no denominator. Maybe that should be fact-checked. We've seen misinformation in many other contexts, electoral contexts, and certainly other health contexts, but the seriousness of this global challenge demands that we ensure that misinformation, disinformation is stamped out whenever possible, said Liberal MP Nathaniel Erskine Smith. Take a look at this guy. It's just got cuck written all over him. You went to an illustrated dictionary, you find a picture of this guy. He's one of 2 Canadian parliamentarians currently involved in UK MP Damien Collins' international initiative, Infotagion. Someone actually came up with that, and they thought it was a good idea. Projections released by the Ontario government last week reflecting the potential impact of COVID-19 in the province underlying the need for such action, said Erskine Smith. Their projections are that 100,000 people could die over the course of the pandemic if there's no public health response. There's always going to be a public health response. What on earth are you talking to? And we could reduce that to 3,000 to 15,000 with a strong public health response. And governments moving forward, again with the moving forward, with a strong public health response depends, in fact, on an informed citizenry. Yeah. Don't question the panic. That would be misinformation, disinformation, and we're not going to allow that. So, we must shut down society. We must kill the economy. Meanwhile, no public health official screening for COVID-19 at Canadian land borders. The union that represents border officers has been asking the government to place health officials at all major land border crossings for weeks, but so far nothing has been done, said Union President Jean-Pierre Fortin. Zero presence, he said. Can you believe it? Let's kill society. Let's kill the economy. But we're going to let people come to our country, and we're not even going to check their temperatures. I believe they call that a narco-tyranny. And also from Global News, judges release growing number accused of violent crimes due to COVID-19 fears. One is the accused getaway driver for a recent Toronto murder attempt. Another allegedly pistol whipped and tasered to in Ottawa over a drug debt. A third was allegedly involved in a Toronto strip mall shooting. A growing number of suspects arrested on serious criminal charges have been ordered released from custody in recent weeks by judges concerned about COVID-19 in Canada's prisons. These are extraordinary, dire times, a judge wrote Monday in a decision ordering the release of a man accused of firing a bullet through his ex-girlfriend's apartment window in Hamilton, Ontario. Although the courts have effectively shut down due to the pandemic, they have heard from detainees arguing they should be released from custody because of the new coronavirus. A flurry of court decisions suggest that even those accused of violent crimes are winning release. As one judge wrote, the pandemic had reordered the usual calculus. They're already quarantined. That's what prison is, among other things. It's a form of quarantine. So we're going to let them go so that they won't be in quarantine anymore and will be exposed to people who are not convicted criminals. Among those released was Kainadid Abshir, who allegedly rented a silver Chrysler 200 four-door sedan and drove 3 gunmen to a Toronto residence on March 13th. They waited until the victim returned home, chased after him, and shot him with 9mm handguns, according to allegations made by the Crown in court. Police recovered 19 shell casings from the scene. The victim survived only because the attackers were not good shots. Yes. If you were in close quarters with someone and you get off 19 rounds and you don't kill them, very bad shots indeed. Do alcohol and COVID-19 isolation mix? Some health experts don't think so. Of course, the health experts would say that. Liquor store sales rise in March as Canadians hunker down at home to wait out the pandemic. And I was going to say to wait out the apocalypse, because that's the impression we have been given. Stefan Molyneux is very, very upset about this. He's at his wit's end. This is self-medication we're talking about. Long lines, shoppers, many of them wearing masks, standing 2 meters apart. Is it worth the risk of community interaction during a deadly pandemic just to load up on booze? The answer for some Canadians, it would seem, is yes. As with sales of groceries, medications, and other goods, alcohol sales increased across the country in March as people stockpiled bottles to prepare for a long isolation through the COVID-19 outbreak. Now, I have to say, I saw people stockpiling alcohol, 3 weeks ago? And it's clear that they're not stockpiling the alcohol, they are drinking the alcohol. Because if people had, stockpiled, then one would expect the number of people at liquor stores, beer stores, or whatever to go down considerably, and it has not. So the people of Canada, or a great number of them, have decided, as Catherine Paradis, a senior research and policy analyst at the Canadian Centre on Substance Abuse and Addiction, says, I think what this crisis we're in might have revealed is that for an important number of Canadians, perhaps alcohol is more essential to them in their lives than they thought it was. Everyone is telling us that these are not normal times. Extraordinary. There's a new normal. We're never going back. So this woman doesn't seem to realize that. Everyone is going to die, we were told. Yeah. You know what would be really good now? I don't know, about 6, 8, 10 beers. I think that would sort of dull the pain, take the edge off, and that's clearly what's happened. Another concern expressed by some experts who spoke with CBC News is that Canadians, already identified by the World Health Organization, that August organization, revered as being some of the heaviest drinkers per capita in the developed world, may increasingly turn to alcohol to dull anxieties and fear during the global crisis. Oh dear, we wouldn't want that, would we? In Newfoundland and Labrador, for example, overall alcohol sales jumped 36% in March compared with the same time last year. Let's just check what the stats are in Newfoundland and Labrador. They have 232 confirmed cases and 2 deaths. Again, Newfoundland is an island, which is in the middle of the North Atlantic. But the Premier Health authorities going absolutely berserk over this. And so it's not a surprise that alcohol sales jumped 36% in March. Privately run liquor express stores, which remained open to pop-in traffic, saw a 70% spike in business. Well, how about that? So it's nice to know that some businesses are still doing well during this apocalypse. And perhaps if we're talking about essential products, I think the behavior of Canadians during this panic would suggest that alcohol is, after food and shelter, it ranks about number 3 in the things that people need. Better Call Saul was on Monday. I didn't discuss it yesterday for obvious reasons. It was directed by Vince Gilligan, the founder and showrunner of Breaking Bad and the co-creator of Better Call Saul. Apparently, he's not been the showrunner for several years now, but he's, as the show is coming to its end, he is displaying a lot more interest than he directed last night's episode, which was very much a set piece called Bagman in the desert that Jimmy McGill, Saul Goodman, has decided that he wants to be a friend of the cartel. And so I guess the cartel is giving him some tests. The first test was to get him, Eduardo Salamanca, or Lalo, out of prison, which he managed to pull off. But then he was asked to pick up the $7 million that was necessary for bail. And he sort of blanched at that because, sounds dangerous, particularly when the circuitous route was described to him. And this is it's in the desert. It is in the desert. And the desert famously is where a lot of people in the American Southwest get whacked and then buried. I have really been impressed by Tony Dalton, who plays Lalo Salamanca. He has a really wide range. He's clearly, we know that he's a murderer, a serial murderer. He has this intensity, but he also has this vein of humor in him. And in Monday's episode, when Kim shows up at his jail cell, pretending that she was involved in his defense, and look, my husband, your husband, he says, he went off to pick something up, and he's not back. He's your husband. And, so you have come to see me because you love him. You seem to be genuinely impressed by this. And of course, now Kim has become, entwined. She's a friend of the cartel, which is, I don't know. I don't think that's where you want to be. So Saul takes his car, his Esteem, out into the desert. I don't know why he's been, he's going to get a new car. Now, why he still was driving that around, I don't know. Was it to remind him of the past? But he says something very funny. He justifies driving out by himself into the middle of the desert to pick up $7 million on behalf of a cartel leader that he has an esteem. See, he's an esteem, so no one would think he would have any money. There has never been more than $50 in an esteem in the history of esteems. Set piece in the desert. Now, Saul Goodman, Jimmy McGill, great movie lover. And pretty much all of the episodes of this series have had allusions to at least one movie. And I was thinking, was Monday's episode an homage to National Lampoon's Vacation? If you've seen the film, and who hasn't, you will remember that Chevy Chase drives where he's not supposed to drive, and he wrecks the car again in the desert, and he goes for help, and we see him wearing the same sort of improvised Arab headgear as Saul does in yesterday's episode. Vince Gilligan certainly knows how to bring home the austere and, to me, rather frightening beauty of the American Southwest, and he didn't disappoint. On Monday, someone asked me on Twitter, so what do you think about Mike Ehrmantraut, taking out all those bandits? This has been one of my least favorite parts of the show. I don't like Mike Ehrmantraut. I didn't like him in Breaking Bad. As I say, his relentless cynicism becomes wearing. This preposterously romantic notion he has of his place in the world. As I said before, it's like Jean-Pierre Melville, except those are real. Those are made up stories. But Mike Ehrmantraut seems to believe this honor among thieves concept. It actually works, But Mike is a man of many parts. He is a Renaissance man. We've already determined that he is a crack sharpshooter. Some years ago, on Better Call Saul. Now it's possible for him to take out a gang of 6 other armed men armed with automatic weapons. Just little old Mike can take them out, while preventing Saul from getting killed. Yeah, I don't see it. I don't see it myself. But I don't know. There's a clear tie-in to Breaking Bad here. The implication is that Saul Goodman really wasn't Saul Goodman until he risked everything. He offered himself up in the desert, much like when Walt White came back from his walkabout in the desert, and he was naked. That he was fully committed to being a professional bad man. People on the internet were talking about Kim, the reviewer at the AV Club. Donna Bowman seemed to think that this episode was hopeful for her. I don't see it as being hopeful. I'm standing with those people who think that she's going to get it. She's too much of a liability. I mean, if she tries to leave, she has too much information, about the cartel, about Lalo. But I suppose we will see soon enough. There was a lot of interest paid in recent days to something from Literary Hub, Choose Your Dead Author Quarantine House. And some very strange choices here. They all seem to be modern authors. House number 1, Hunter S. Thompson, deal breaker. No. You wouldn't want to live in the same neighborhood as Hunter S. Thompson. Bertolt Brecht, Judith Krantz. Wow, that is a substantial lowering of quality there. And then Oscar Wilde and Flannery O'Connor. House number 2, Virginia Woolf. What a nasty woman she was. F. Scott Fitzgerald, Jane Austen, Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie was a success manual author. He wasn't a littérateur. And Susan Sontag, ugh. Yes, the white race is the cancer of human history. House number 3, Ayn Rand, Maya Angelou, Sylvia Plath, Franz Kafka, and Shirley Jackson. And my reaction on Twitter was, what did Franz Kafka ever do to be associated with those creeps? House number 4, James Baldwin. Yes, I'm reminded that Steve Saylor reminded us that John and Robert Kennedy used to call James Baldwin Martin Luther Queen. Gertrude Stein. L. Ron Hubbard. Oh, okay. Barbara Pym and Carson McCullers. Carson McCullers wrote one novel that supposedly was ghostwritten by Truman Capote. The only the only writer of quality there is Barbara Pym. Gertrude Stein, I know she's famous for being a lesbian. I mean, she was a serious writer and all, but does anyone read her stuff? I don't think so. House number 5, Vladimir Nabokov. Audre Lorde, diversity pick. Emily Dickinson, T.S. Eliot, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's the best group. House number 6, James Joyce, Dorothy Parker, Ernest Hemingway, Zora Neale Hurston, and Norman Mailer. Wow, you got Ernest Hemingway and Norman Mailer in the same house. I'm suspecting a lot of fist fighting and a lot of shooting. With perhaps the women and James Joyce hiding under tables. It seems like such a narrow group of people that they chose. But Judith Krantz? Wow. Okay. So that's it for the show. I'll take one last look at the chat. Earl Pipe says, I'd live with the Mormon mammy who wrote the Twilight books. Who was bad in 5? Well, Audre Lorde she's just a diversity pick. It's that simple. Marquez, I don't know. Magical realism, I'm not a fan. But back to the chat. I mean, that's Alice B. Toklas had the best brownie recipe. Yeah, there was a movie, in the late 60s, early 70s called I Love You, Alice B. Toklas. There were a lot of movies with the same theme in the late 60s, early 70s. You know, straight, middle-aged guys. They meet some free spirit, some long-haired woman, you know, and they have sex, and they smoke dope. And then they realize how narrow and blighted their lives have been. It was all absolute tosh. But, you know, I suspect that, you know, say you're a middle-aged Hollywood executive and you think, yeah, you know what would be great? Having sex with Barbara Hershey or Barbara Siegel. And she was, that would be good. So let's make some wish fulfillment movies. Mary Renault. Mary Renault is good. Let's see. Where is Ezra Pound? Well, wasn't he at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Washington, D.C.? He decided to claim insanity rather than face the consequences for his treason against America during World War II. You know, Oberyn Waugh said that when he was a schoolboy, he got a hold of his address and he wrote him letters about his poetry. And I suppose Pound is kind of a youthful fascination, or was a youthful fascination for a lot of people. You know, groundbreaking. And Oberyn Waugh reported that often he would get quite serious letters, you know, with detailed examination of his poems in question. And about half the time, it was just a screed of demented gibberish that he would get from Ezra Pound. Okay, so that's it for episode 35 of the KMG Show. Hey, it's good to be back. And I'm looking at myself here, what I look like on screen, and there's a lamp to the right of me. The lamp that I'd previously used had a completely opaque lampshade. This has a white one, or just off-white. So obviously a great deal more light is being directed at me. So that accounts for the difference. And I suppose it's much more visually pleasing. There's no, pillow and sheets at the end of the room. So I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. If you like the show or any part of it, I would greatly appreciate it if you would press the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you would like to support the show, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com. See you tomorrow. Have a good evening. And as always, I hope that in the midst of this destruction of society, that you can all still maintain human relationships. Bye bye.